Hello everybody, this is Shylock here with my Berwick Saga Pick My Unit playthrough. The units were picked by fellow FE fans over at the Fire Emblem subreddit. This playthrough will assume that you have not played Berwick Saga but have played Fire Emblem. So fellow Fire Emblem fans, please follow along. The objective of this map is to seize the mansion with Rhys. He is the main character, the Lord. He is the one with the blonde hair. He has many important properties, but the most important property for this map in particular, the early game especially, and the entire game really, is his skill Authority. This skill grants ally within 3 hexes plus 10 hit. This is really important because this game has low hit rates, especially during the early game. Compare the Iron Sword of this game to the Iron Sword of the Fire Emblem game. This game's Iron Sword has 60 hit. Compare that to the Iron Sword of Fire Emblem games, which typically have 90 hit. So this game has some really low hit rates, and Authority is pretty much needed in order to get some very acceptable hit rates during the early game. The next thing I want to talk about is Ward. He's the guy with the beard. But before that, we are joined by 2 new units. I will talk about them later. Back to Ward. Ward is your Jagan, your turbo early game paladin. Only his class in this game is veteran, as he is really old. The 2 most important properties of him is his high level, level 22, and his guard skill. I don't use guard in this map, but the only thing you need to know about that is that it replaces a adjacent unit combat with his combat, so with that he can defend other units. More important property of his right now is his high level, level 22. This game, units level up to level 30, and their levels do not revert back to 1 once they are promoted. The types of weapons a unit can use is determined by their level. So Ward, who is level 22, can use weapons up to rank 22. This means that he can use nearly every sword, spear, and medium shield in the game. He also, one of these weapons in fact is the Night Sword that he just used. You may have seen that it has a plus sign next to its might. This is because that indicates an extra round of combat. This game has no natural doubling, so most of your extra attacks will come from your weapons. The plus sign indicates one way to get this, and by having an extra round of combat. This game also has it so if you take damage within battle, you actually lose that round of combat for that one time. We see it actually here when Reese attacks the boss Benner. Well, first he activates his Adept skill, but notice how the boss Benner did not counter back. This is because he took damage. Ward also uses spears, which actually gain more might the more you move. Anyways, we see here Deanne, the red-haired fighter, attack that enemy, and that enemy turns red. This is because it is now provoked. It has a hidden enemy skill called Fury, which makes it so that it becomes provoked, and it would target the last enemy to target it. This was so that Ialso can be saved from its attacks. I want to talk a bit about the hex map here in this game. It doesn't really change much. I think it was mostly included because of the spear might bonus, and it will work within hexes but not squares, because adjacent squares are not equidistant to each other, but hexes are. It also makes it more difficult to defend squishy units like Ialso. So I use some AI manipulation with provoking that enemy so that it wouldn't attack her. And Ward has the guard skill, which sadly isn't used in this chapter. The next thing I want to talk about is Shylock. He is the horseman, the mounted class that can use bows. He's not very good in the early game because of his low accuracy. it's especially best since he has ranged combat. This game has 3 avoid stats, one for adjacent attacks, one for range attacks, and one for magic attacks. The avoid stat for range attack actually doubles the terrain bonus. So Shylock has to deal with enemies that have a lot more avoid than it would if he attacked adjacently, which is why sometimes I attack from adjacent hexes with his bows. That is actually quite interesting because in Fire Emblem, bows cannot attack from adjacent hexes. In this game they can, because this game has a very different range. There's 0 range, 1 range, and 2 or more range. 0 range are melee attacks when enemies go into the enemy hexes in order to attack. You saw it with this animation of Vantage running towards Rhys and the background changing. This is because he ran into his tile in order to attack him at melee range. We see Reese unequip his shield. Units that have more speed than the enemy can actually redo a missed attack. But as I said before, if they get countered, they lose their attack for that round of combat. So I unequipped his shield in order to maximize his avoid. That way he can actually get the more of a chance to re-attack if he missed the first time. Anyways, back to the ranges. Those are actually 1-2 range, so they can attack at adjacent hexes, but they can't counter melee ranges, which is 0. Crossbows are 0-1 range, meaning they attack from a distance from adjacent hexes, but can counter melee ranges. The next 2 units I want to talk about are Leon and Adept, the red and green knight archetypes. Here we see Leon activate his deathmatch skill, which extends combat to 5 rounds. This skill existed in Thracia 7076, but that was randomly activated. Here it is command based. Adol, on the other hand, has Vantage. If he's faster than his opponent, he can attack back. He can attack first, as long as the attack was from 0 range. Remember that in this game you lose your chance to attack if you get damage. So this can actually be used to deny enemies of their attacks. Anyways, let's talk about the other 2 units, Deanne and Ialso. Deanne is the red-haired fighter, and he is by far the best combat unit in this game. One of the reasons is because of his desperation skill, which increases his accuracy by 22. Here we see Albert and Kris. They don't do much, I talk about them later. You may have seen Deanne activate his desperation skill, and it's command based. It can be used at any time, but the enemy can actually counter back even if they are damaged. This has an interesting side effect because Deanne can actually counter back as well even when damaged, which he is because it also increases the enemy hit rate to 100, and it can only be used by units who are able to counter back. But if he has more speed than the enemy, he also gets his re-attack. So it allows him to double in a way similar to the Fire Emblem games. Next unit is Ialso, the blue-haired cleric. She is your standard healer, nothing much to say, other than she has the blessing skill, which heals units at the start of every turn for 0 to 3 HP. You may have noticed here that she does not use tomes or stabs to cast magic. Instead, she uses orbs. The lore of this game has it that magic users use orbs instilled with the power of the gods in order to cast their magic. Because, you know, it's power from the gods, generally magic users are from a clergy. This game story has a heavy emphasis on religion. The main antagonist of this game, the Raz Empire. The whole war is a holy war because of their different gods. The god of the Raz Empire grants their people dark magic, which is general purpose. Here, the goddess of Maria, which is the goddess that the allies in this game generally follow, grants holy magic, which is generally healing magic that Izerna uses, as well as anima magic that is separated into fire, thunder, and wind, just like in Fire Emblem. Anyways, here is another reason as to why Deanne is the best combat unit in the game. Here, he uses his Vengeance skill. It's actually called Wrath in the Japanese version, but I would call it Vengeance, mostly because it's more similar to the Vengeance skill from Fire Emblem Awakening. When Deanne takes damage, he has a chance to counter back with the damage he sustained added to his attack. The probability is actually equal to the damage he took times 3. So I found it a very fun skill to use because you can actually maximize the probability of it by just taking a whole lot of damage. It's very high risk, high reward that way, especially because of how injury and wounds work in this game. You may have noticed the red and green cross that are on some units. Those are injuries and wounds respectively, green and red. Let's talk about injuries first. Every weapon has a base 3% chance to injure a unit. When a unit is injured, they are unequipped of their weapon and their avoider is also cut by 10. They are also more susceptible to a wound. A wound, which is denoted by a red cross, gets inflicted whenever a unit takes a large amount of damage. There are different probabilities of it. Generally, what you need to know that the more damage a unit takes and the less HP they have, the higher the chance of a wound, and that injury drastically increases the chance of it. Injury disable most of a unit's actions. Here you see me actually save because this game has battle saves every 5 turns. Anyways, back to the wounded status. It disables most of a wounded unit's actions, but also allows them to be captured. So in this game, in order to capture somebody, you generally have to inflict a lot of damage on them, but not actually kill them. And preferably, they have a wound beforehand. Anyways, you may have seen Shylock attack twice. He has 2 skills that actually allows him to do that, which is multi-shot and re-attack. This game has plenty of skills that actually have a charge up time, which is why I don't just spam those skills. They require certain turns to pass in order to be able to be used. I want to talk about the turn order in this game because it's actually very unique. You may have noticed the red and blue pips that are running on the right hand side of the screen. This indicates the turn order of the game. In order to explain it, I'm going to take a hypothetical scenario where the enemy outnumbers the player 2 to 1. In this game, the amount of actions that you have before it switches control to the enemy is determined by the proportion. So in my hypothetical scenario where the enemy outnumbers the player 2 to 1, they would get 2 actions, then it will switch control to the player who would then have 1 action, then back to the enemy. One thing to note is that every turn starts with the player action. This is actually really important to note. Let's talk about the last 2 units that appeared, Albert and Kris. Albert is actually one of the picked units, and he is of the Sergeant class who can use small shields, spears, and swords. So he has 2 very important skills. One is Provoke. Remember the red state that Deanne made the enemy he have? Yeah, that was the provoke status, which I explained before. But that was because of the enemy skill itself. They become provoked when attacked. Albert has the ability to use his own skill in order to provoke another enemy. This is actually quite useful. I don't use it in this map because he arrives really late, but you will see me using it a lot in the upcoming maps. We see Leon attack that enemy and kill that enemy for 1,000 gold. That was pretty much needed because this game has very little money. And one of the ways to get money is to capture units and take their inventory like Albert did. Captured units can also be sold for a ransom, and I'll explain that once I actually do that in this playthrough. Albert also has the skill Dodge Arrows, which decreases the accuracy of arrows. So it's self-explanatory. It has a 67% chance to activate whenever Albert is about to be hit by an arrow. The last unit to talk about is Kris, who is the bow knight who can use both bows and crossbows. Oh, but before that, we have Adept here get into a battle with this soldier. You may have noticed that he needs to dismount. That is because mounted unit cannot enter indoor areas like that house. So he actually needs to dismount in order to activate that event. And that is a fixed event. The player unit will always win and then get the material, which is used when forging. I'll explain forging later on in the playthrough. Back to Kris. She uses crossbows and bows, and crossbows are really useful in this game. They ignore strength during battle calculations, but they have high might anyways and very high hit, but they do have high weight. Also note that they can attack from 0-1 range, so they can only attack adjacent units, but if that adjacent unit is a melee unit, they will not be able to counter back, but the crossbow user is able to counter back melee units. You may have noticed that both Shylock and Kris actually have arrows in their inventory. That is because bows and crossbows use arrows, which adds in like certain effects. Generally, it's just a might bonus here. Here we see Leon get the first level of the playthrough. He levels up strength, small shield skill, and spear skill. Here we see Ward dismount in order to get on that cliff to attack that enemy. Cliffs are another terrain that mounted units cannot cross and need to dismount to do so. He attacked that enemy and killed that enemy in order to get the harpoon. The harpoon adds plus 12% to the base injury rate. So using it gives the unit a 15% chance to injure the opponent. Anyways, here we see Reese dismount, then seize to end the chapter. That was the first mission of Berwick Saga of the first chapter. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you next time.